everyone, and welcome to Geotab's Wildcard Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, my name is Shay Green, and I am a learning consultant here at Geotab. For today's session, we'll be hearing from Sue Miller, our Senior Fleet Account Manager, and Carlos Moreno, our Senior Customer Success Specialist, and they're going to be discussing fleet safety. While they are doing a quick introduction of themselves, we're going to launch a quick poll to find out more about what type of fleets you guys are working with and who's on the line today, so we can kind of make sure that we're focused on that. With that being said, I'll hand things over to Sue and Carlos for those intros.
Thanks, Shay. This is Sue Miller, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I've been with Geotab now for 4 years, and prior to joining Geotab, I was the Director of Fleet Services for McDonald's Corporation for 29 years, and I've been in the fleet industry a little bit longer than that, but my entire career has been focused on fleet management, managing a fleet, and driver safety. So I bring a lot of experience and situations to the table that I can hopefully help people with. So Carlos, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, and my name is Carlos Moreno, Senior Customer Success Specialist here with Geotab. I've been part of the customer success team for 2 years. Actually, Susan Miller gave me the opportunity here. So excited to be a part of it. In the last 2 years, I've worked with about 1,000 clients, anywhere from small fleets to large fleets. And right now, I'm more primarily focused on medium to large fleets. So definitely excited to get into the conversation through safety. And I know Sue's going to go over some statistics as soon as the poll is done, and we're going to go from there.
Awesome, thank you guys. All right, we're gonna close out that poll and take a look at those results. So it looks like, wow, it's a really close race between the three. So we have 67% of medium duty, 63% for heavy duty, and 59% for light duty, to help you out there, Carlos. So I'll go ahead and close out that poll, and you are ready to roll.
Awesome, go ahead, Sue.
So again, I wanted to just say thank you to everybody for joining us today to talk about safety and reporting best practices, and also just the state of driver safety. You know, managing a fleet is like running a business within a business. And as long as there are people that are going to be doing work, particularly involving the operating of vehicles or machinery, we're always going to need to focus on our employees' safety and their well-being. And as just a few of the statistics shown here demonstrate, the reality is that crashes are a result of poor driver behavior, of speeding or other aggressive behavior, and it results in millions and billions of dollars lost, and more importantly, lives and injuries. But we really do want everybody to go home to their families every day. So paying attention to safety is critical to any business. And coming out of COVID, you know, there are new policies surrounding sanitation and disinfecting for health concerns. But again, the state of driver safety as relates to crashes isn't new, and it really remains one of the highest risk exposures to a business. So whether you're self-insured or not, you know, insurance costs continue to rise. And fleets and companies need to have a solid, consistently managed policy in place to promote that positive behavior and demonstrate an ongoing practice of managing safety. And the term nuclear verdict is nothing that anyone wants to hear for their business. And all it's going to take is that one horrible crash to forever tarnish your brand, or, dependent on the size of your business, possibly close your doors. And having sat through a deposition in defense of my company's fleet safety policy, I know firsthand how important having safety as part of your daily operations is. And maintaining those good records of how you report and then take action on driver behavior is very important. And thankfully, the use of telematics makes this much more possible. And Carlos is going to continue to show you how you can manage that.
Thank you, Sue, for that. Definitely some very, very serious numbers that we have to consider. And just moving on into the agenda, I'm going to give you a little bit of the perspective that we take on the customer success team when it comes to safety, because it is such a large spectrum that we can consider. Those numbers the liability and the consequences is usually what we keep in mind. And we understand that our clients get this system a lot of times because of safety. And it could be the higher levels that understand this and we want to, prevent that liability and we purchase a system, but sometimes it doesn't fully translate to the day-to-day operations. And we see some of those behaviors not maybe fully addressed. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So number one really is, how do you categorize your fleet, right? Because not every fleet's the same, and the default safety parameters, as they are universal, they have to be tailored to your fleet. Looking into your default versus your custom rules, and if you are going to need to customize some of the rules. Speaking about the tools that we have on there and how to utilize them and how to really view them, right? How are the best ways to approach them, and tracking the progress, right? How are you going to keep the finger on the pulse of which direction the safety of your fleet is going? And the big part of it is going to be the accountability, right? The system can provide the data and we can show you all the tools and everything, but it's going to come down to that fleet manager, that company really making sure that all the stakeholders are on board and there's that buy-in across the board. There's HR support to be able to enforce these policies. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what the company does with the data that we collect and the tools that we put in place. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, when it comes to fleet type, every time we look into a client, there's a few ways that you can categorize your fleet. And we mentioned it earlier, right? The most common one that we recommend is the vehicle type, right? Are you a light duty, medium duty, heavy duty? And I put this chart that we usually utilize to be able to break down which class or which rule set you should kind of follow. But that's not the only way, right? That another thing that we need to consider is departments. Are you going to break this down to departments, sales, service, delivery? It could be different things, and even management, right? Specific supervisors that manage a group of drivers, and you can have a mixed fleet there, or even region. You can have the West Coast, Nevada, you can have Texas, and I have fleets in Texas where their speed limit there is 80 miles per hour. And this impacts how you manage your safety because it's going to impact the settings of your rules. Your speeding rule is not going to be the same in Las Vegas where it's 65 miles per hour in the highway versus 80 miles per hour in Texas. So there's different things that you have to consider. You got to understand which way you want to go about it and really determine how to customize your rules. So when it comes to your safety rules, you can go with the default rules, and it's just your aggressive acceleration, braking, cornering. You also have your speeding, right? And when it comes to the speeding, just understanding the parameter that you're setting up is, you could be, for example, here, 10 miles per hour over the posted speed limit over 20 seconds. And the reason we have, and I always highlight the over 20 seconds is, for example, if you have drivers that are driving on the highway, for example, here in Las Vegas, 65 miles per hour, it's not uncommon for a driver to exceed that speed to maybe pass a vehicle or pass a larger truck in front of them. But we want to put that parameter because if you're speeding for longer than that, then that's just a violation. It's not you trying to get in front of that vehicle for safety. Seatbelt violations, which can be customized as well. I have fleets where the seatbelt, for example, we have a fleet in university campuses, and this applies to construction as well, where the drivers within that specific location or the specific area where there's a job site or the university, they're not wearing their seatbelt. They're driving 10, 15 miles per hour from point A to point B. They're hopping in and out of their vehicles, and this seatbelt rule will not apply to them. So there's a couple ways that we take that on. One, we can create a custom seatbelt rule to consider anything over 25 miles per hour instead. So when they do get on the actual road, then we are calculating whether or not they're using their seatbelt. Or if it's a static location like a university, we can actually create a zone and just encompass that entire location and make sure that the seatbelt rule doesn't apply within that specific zone. So there's a couple ways, and you just have to consider your business use. I wanted to show this picture because a common question that I get is, well, we have a mixed fleet. How do I go about it? When it comes to your the safety scorecard, which I'm going to talk about and why it's so important, you can have multiple. Just because you have one set of rules, it doesn't mean that has to be the only set of rules for your fleet. You can consider and break it down. Sales department might have different rules that you're considering. Speeding might be different for them. You might have service department that's different. Delivery department that's different, just depending on their driving. If some of them are only stay on highway, your rules might be a little bit different versus the ones that are primarily on surface streets. So you are able to have multiple safety scorecard to monitor specifically how your fleet is actually behaving. Now, I wanted to talk about the safety scorecard because This is, I believe, one of the most important reports when it comes to safety within Geotab. And I did include a couple of resources. You'll also find these at the end of the resource page. Number one, you have the driver safety scorecard white paper. And this is really just tells you how these numbers are populated. How is this generated? And I also included the user guide, which really walks you through step by step on how to implement and set up the safety scorecard for your fleet. So there's a couple perspectives there, but I'll give a quick summary on it. When it comes to the safety scorecard, you'll see the date range that you can customize of what you see, whether it's last week, last month, depending on what kind of trend you want to see. It gives you your overall score of the behavior of your drivers, and it gives you the 6 specific unique rules that you have selected to have in your safety scorecard. And again, these are tailored to you. These don't have to be the ones that you calculate, and you assign a weight to it. And when it comes to the weight, this is how we populate the overall score. But really, when it comes to weight, it is just a mathematical equation that we put into the report to quantify the behavior. But at the end of the day, I tell my fleet managers is take a look at this percentage. The bigger the percentage that you're assigning to the specific rule, which needs to equal to 100% at the end of the day, it's the level of priority that you're putting on this specific rule. We usually have excessive speed over 90 miles per hour, which, we usually put that one between 80, 90 miles per hour, depending on the fleet. But that has a heavier weight because we want to be sure that if they are breaking this specific rule, it impacts their score heavily. And we're able to have that visibility across the board. And you can also customize the classifications. What does a good driver look like? What does an average driver look like? And what does a high risk driver look like? And you can actually break that down. This is just by default, the settings that we have here. And moving down to the actual data in your report, you'll have your driver, the group that they belong to. If you have it broken down into departments, you'll be able to identify that. The distance that they travel and their overall score. And the way that this is calculated is for every 100 miles that a driver drives, it allows them to break that specific rule up to 10 times on a sliding scale. And the way I explain that is if I was your driver in your fleet and Carlos drove 100 miles last week, but I broke your specific speeding rule, whatever that parameter might be for you. If I broke that 5 times in that 100 miles, then I would have a 50% for speeding. And considering the weight for those, that would combinedly and put together add up to my overall score. And what I usually say, this is a phenomenal tool, right? And from here, having this data, you actually within the report, you can actually scroll over to the right and it'll show you the number of incidents and violations that were made. So for speeding, we quantify and give you, there was, 10, 15 actual incidents within that date range. So very powerful tool. But from here, how do you use it, right? What does that all mean? And what I usually like to use is, this is like a compass. Once the rules are set up correctly, I know that it's put together properly. We're capturing the data that we want. This is a compass. It's guiding me where we need to focus our energy. And I think I see a common mistake made where fleet managers come on and see, oh my goodness, I see a lot of red, a lot of orange. Like, we need to address all this stuff at once. I usually recommend pick 2. Right? Which one's your biggest one? Well, speeding is a big one right now. Okay, let's put an initiative and focus on a goal for the next month or a quarter towards speeding, and let's set some parameters for that and communication. Because what we've noticed in the past, the trend is if you focus on 1 or 2, once your drivers realize that you are putting some emphasis on specific behavior, for example, speeding, the rest kind of follow suit. It seems that if you focus and you put maybe some driver feedback, which is audible alerts that I'll talk about shortly, and the speeding starts to go off, it impacts their behavior across the board, and it helps increase the score. So those are just some of the things that we see when it comes to the safety scorecard, and we have more reports. Again, I mentioned the safety scorecard is a compass. Once I understand what my areas of opportunity are and I know what my driver policy, the end goal really I want it to be, then if I identify that speeding violations, speeding is an area of opportunity for our company, then I make sure that I dissect the high speeding violations report and I use that to support our efforts. And this is going to highlight the drivers that are having the highest number of violations, the percentage of time that they're spending actual speeding. And even within this report, you actually will be able to see their max speed for that date range as well. Right, and this is very easy to have in your dashboard and be able to see, okay, last week, why did we have a vehicle exceed 114 miles per hour or 107? So this gives you a clear view. You have aggressive driving as well, if that's an area of opportunity, and your seatbelt violations, which again, all these reports can be customized to your specific rules. Now, how do you keep track? How do you make sure that we are making progress through what we're doing? Again, it's just visibility and making sure if you have your dashboard, utilize it properly, organize it in a way that you have your most important reports or the things that you're tracking. If speeding and safety scorecard are the two things that you're watching right now, then you have those two right up front. And the people that are logging in are seeing it consistently. That's the first thing that they see. Now, also, I talk about visibility to the stakeholders. If HR is involved in your initiative, then the safety scorecard should be something that maybe not like the fleet managers getting this every week, but maybe once a month they should be able to receive that safety scorecard and see the trend, right? And they can compare, last month they were at, 85 and this month they're at 89. They're making progress. Or if it's 85 and now it's 79, where's the miscommunication? Where do we need to pivot? And just and I'm throwing those numbers out there, but those are real numbers. Usually when I'm working with a fleet manager or a new fleet, on average, without engagement or prior engagement, we usually see them on high 70s to mid 80s as a percentage of their score for safety. And once we engage and we set up some action plans and we focus on one or two parameters, we usually see them climb up to high 80s to low 90s, and that's more of an average, right? I think if you're focused on having a safety score, if you find yourself in the mid 70s to mid 80s, that's average, below average. If you're in the high 80s, that's you're doing okay. It's a little bit above average, but I think you have to have a good action plan. You actually have a good safety policy, driver policy, to be able to be in the high 90s. I've only seen a handful of times that before we engage a fleet to have in the 97, 98. I personally never seen 100%. I don't think anyone's perfect, but I haven't seen that yet. But this specific fleet, she had a phenomenal way to just highlight and celebrate good behaviors and reward her drivers for good behavior and consistent good behavior. And they would coach privately when it came to the drivers that needed coaching. They would do that privately, obviously. So, and another thing I wanted to highlight here, when it comes to the rules, you can actually set up alerts to be sent out. And a common mistake that I see is when a fleet comes on, again, sometimes they see their score and go, man, we need to address everything. They turn on alerts to everything. And as a fleet manager or the person in charge, it's very easily to become overwhelmed, especially if you're getting 10, 15, 20, 50 emails plus a day on violations. You're going to overlook that right away. You're just going to turn a blind eye to that because you're getting it consistently. So when it comes to emailed alerts, I usually just recommend there's a couple ones that are really good to turn on. One being the possible collision, and this is just based on the accelerometer in one of the default rules. If it captures or a potential high change of the accelerometer, that could be considered as a possible collision, it would trigger an alert. And that's a good one for a fleet manager, dispatch manager, or someone in charge, supervisor, to know and be able to connect with that driver, say, hey, is everything okay? We received an alert that there was a big impact in your vehicle. Is what's the deal? And thankfully, hopefully, it could be just simple as, oh, well, my device is loose and it's just kind of hanging under my dash and it knocked the dashboard at the bottom. That's why it's so imperative to make sure that the installation is secure. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, there was an impact and you're aware of it and you know what's going on. Second one that I would recommend to have an alert enabled to is maybe your excessive speeding violation. And you saw the example on the safety scorecard was 90 miles per hour. That's just default, but most of our fleets are, excessive speeding could be 80, 85, depending on where they're located. And you may want to know anytime a vehicle goes over that specific speed and be able to communicate that. You don't have to wait at the end of the week or at the end of the month to review your scorecard and find out you have a handful of people exceeding 90 miles per hour. That's that's a huge red flag, especially for fleets that have logos on their vehicles. That's a huge reputation hit within the community. And I mean, even to this day, we have some states that utilize Geotab, and for them, the reputation with the community is huge. But for any business, for any company, right? Well, especially with how things are nowadays, and anything happens and it can be in social media, 2 seconds ago. So that's big and important for us. Now we'll come on to accountability and liability. Geotab can definitely have the tools to help you with your initiative, right? When it comes to Geotab, we have ways to escalate this, even utilizing driver feedback. And there's a couple ways we use driver feedback. One, we can enable it onto the actual specific rule, right? For example, speeding, you can turn it on, and rule-based feedback looks something like an audible alert from the device to the driver. It could be 3 beeps rapidly, 10 beeps, things like that. But that's more of a blanket alert, just kind of like a head reminders, hey, we captured something for the driver to know. The second level, I think it's a little bit more assertive, and it's a device-based. It doesn't apply to your entire role, but I usually recommend this if you have a particular person that needs a little bit more coaching. I'll use, Johnny has broken the excessive speeding rule multiple times last week. Well, maybe for him, he likes to break the 90-mile-per-hour rule. We can enable his specific device to begin beeping at him when he exceeds 85 miles per hour, and it will continue to beep until he goes under 78 or so. Or you can set that parameter, right? But it's more of a nuisance, right? It's continuous. It's more assertive. They're definitely going to find out and understand. Now, again, a recommendation and common mistake we see here is when people find out that we have this audible alert that can be enabled, they go driver feedback happy. They turn on many of the alerts at once. And number one thing is communication. You need to tell your drivers what it is exactly that you're turning on, and they know the parameters. Just keep it consistent. We can't tell you our fleet managers what to do, but I've seen a common thing where, for example, sales for some reason gets a little bit more leniency and their speeding rules are a little bit different, or they're not turning out those on parameters as quickly as other departments. Safety across the board. But again, that's your decision to make. But that would make it easier for HR to back you when you're keeping things even across the board. Because if there's those differences, then you're going to have to try to answer why one driver has this parameter and why this other driver doesn't. So that was just a recommendation. Secondly, rarely, every now and then we get the comment of, well, I never heard the feedback, or I didn't hear, I had the music on, the vehicle's too loud. We actually have an IOX Go Talk. It's an extension that you can purchase and plug into the actual device. And what this does, it translates text to speech. So they will actually, you can, it comes with a little mount you can put right next to the dash, right in front of their face, and be considering safety, but on the dash, to where it will let them know exactly what's going on. So if they break the speeding rule, it'll say speeding violation captured. And so that's one way to address that if you were to having that issue. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about the collision reconstruction report. And based on our accelerometer, we can set up this report if hopefully you never have to do this, but like Sue mentioned, if you find yourself in a place where there was an accident in your fleet and you're trying to identify exactly what happened, right? There's blame going, hey, your driver was speeding, he didn't even slow down, things like that. You can pinpoint the exact time and date and find every single piece of data that the device collected during that incident. And it could give you things like RPMs. Did the driver attempt to slow down, right? Did he accelerate? Was he wearing a seatbelt? Was he speeding? What was the velocity that that vehicle was going? So all these things can arm you to really have that in your back pocket to have those conversations if you find yourself in that situation. And I wanted to also talk about the marketplace. These are points that are, again, included already within Geotab. This one you have to purchase. This was an included one. But when it comes to the marketplace, we have some phenomenal partners when it comes to safety. We have one of them, it's the driver challenge, and it kind of takes the safety scorecard approach that we have, but it almost gamifies it. It highlights good drivers, and it sends notifications on rankings of drivers and how they're doing. So that would be maybe one option to gamify it and put a positive twist to their behavior. Secondly, more on the liability side, we have this partner called Predictive Coach. And what this one does is takes those safety parameters, those rules, and it actually assigns additional training based on behavior. So if you have a driver that speeds consistently, if he has 2-3 speeding violations within a week, it'll actually assign him 2 to 5 minute training for them that they have to go through and answer questions on to be able to complete, and you'll be able to report on that. So if you ever are in a position where, hey, you have to explain why a driver's behavior wasn't addressed, we can go back to something like this and say, actually, we captured these violations, training were assigned, and he actually completed these trainings. It's a big tool to have in your back pocket as well. And we obviously have cameras and more. And all those things are phenomenal tools to begin to address and really implement safety, but it all comes down to your driver policy in your company. As a fleet manager, supervisor, implementing a safety rule, something that happens very regularly is we have this conversation with the customer success team and a new fleet manager, and they get excited about the tools. And they, hey, I want to turn this on. I want to do this. This is phenomenal. But sometimes they don't get the buy-in from HR or the VPs or the other stakeholders. And when they try to implement or put actionable steps towards addressing and utilizing these tools, they feel like their hands are tied. They're not able to. Or if they, if they wrote up a driver because of a behavior, then HR comes in and is like, why did you do that? Where's the consistency? How come, so communication is key within the company. Incentives and consequences. We've seen by far positive reinforcement definitely is more effective than negative reinforcement. So that's a huge piece of it. Clear communication, just making sure that we're letting the drivers know what the expectation is, what the driver policy is, what it means, right? The why behind it, get their buy-in of it's not just a dollar signs. Like Sue said, we want to be sure that these drivers are coming back home, and it's job security. Any of these incidents can impact other drivers and the ability to have a job as well. And again, just to reiterate, HR support. Make sure that your HR partner, your company, your HR department is aware of what you're doing, and making sure that you guys have a progressive action plan readily available. If you have this in place before you need it, I think you're going to be more confident when it comes to addressing safety in your fleet. But if you don't have this part taken care of ahead of time, you're going to be hesitant to address some of these items because you don't know what's acceptable or not acceptable within HR. So I would clarify that ahead of time. I've used this formula before, but I think it applies, and it's a good way to approach it. You have these tools, you have these items, you have this conversation. Maybe you don't have a driver policy within your fleet yet. Where do you start? You by yourself, you can't do it. You need to bring the stakeholders into the table and have this conversation of what's important, what are the non-negotiables? How are we going to prioritize and communicate this so we can begin to utilize and configure these tools and set up, SMART goals? What are the goals, right? And I mentioned the benchmark of the percentages earlier. And like I said, it's, coming into a new quarter and saying, okay, we're sitting at an 85. Let's shoot for, a 8% increase by the end of this quarter. I think that's very doable, and tracking it monthly, right? You can't come in and say, I'm 85, I want us to have 100 by the end of the quarter. I think you're setting up your team to fail and for a lot of frustration, and you're probably going to try to use a lot of the driver feedback. And I've seen that turn into drivers unplugging the devices and quote unquote lost devices or malfunctioning devices. So that becomes a headache. So it's your approach. And visibility, right? Like I said, making sure that the reports are being communicated and we're reviewing this. Where's the progress? Do we need to pivot and adjust our approach? And accountability, we talked about that a few seconds ago. Follow through, and make sure it's consistent. So that's really the approach that I would recommend. I tied in some resources here. I know that we're going to be in the next Wildcard Wednesday. My colleague Ricky Rivera is going to talk about safety trends, and that's a phenomenal tool when it comes to taking a look at the past 12 months and which direction you've come from and where you're heading. That's a phenomenal tool to use. So I just wanted to put that little plug in there. If you're able to attend, that's going to be a great presentation there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carlos. We are going to dive into Q&A, but while we do that, we're going to go ahead and launch another poll. Just some of the topics that we talked about in today's session, and we want to get your feedback. Is there anything you want to see more detailed information on? So please take a couple of seconds to check off anything you want to see more about. And then also when the session ends, there is a survey that pops up. So please make sure that you are doing that one as well. We want to get your feedback as often as possible to make sure we're catering these to your specific needs and you're coming to content that is actually relevant to you. While we've got that poll going for now, we'll jump into Q&A. So the first one we have for you here, Carlos, is with COVID-19, do you have any suggestions on coaching drivers? Do you know how some of your other customers are currently coaching? I'm assuming maybe over teleconference or just a standard phone call.
Definitely teleconference, Zoom, whatever platform you utilize is definitely something that I see is popular within our fleets. But I think not just the type of communication you're going to have, making sure that is consistent. And a tip of some of the fleet managers that I see do it well is they don't just schedule a coaching session because of a bad behavior. They have things set into place, whether they're meeting once a month or once every 2 weeks to discuss just trends or events, or highlight those good behaviors. They're already in place, right? So that communication, that coaching is already happening. It's scheduled. Drivers expect it, so there's not that hesitance of, oh man, my supervisor scheduled a session to discuss safety with me. What did I do? So now there's a defense set up, right? And obviously, off of those scheduled maybe group or individual sessions, if you need a coach, then obviously you can schedule that separately additionally, and I think it's going to be received a little bit better if they have that positive reinforcements already being put in place ahead of time.
If I can jump in and tag on to that, Carlos, it's very
Yeah.
important what you said in terms of having those type of things set up ahead of time and identifying those stakeholders, and perhaps even forming a fleet safety committee that meets on a regular basis, whether that's monthly or quarterly, and it's comprised of different departments, that operations, your fleet manager, your safety supervisor, your human resources, or even someone from your general counsel or legal group, because then people know that this is taking place on a regular basis, and out of those meetings you could generate very positive newsletters, or provide drivers and the company with statistical information on how well the safety programs are going.
And if I could add just one last thing on there is, I've noticed that the fleet managers that have success with it, when they're doing those scheduled meetings, if they generalize the areas of opportunity and say, hey, within the fleet, our area of opportunities are X, Y, Z, the people who that are actually engaging in that behavior, it's almost happens of if the shoe fits, right? And if you hear that, that's going to be a focus for the fleet moving forward. If you're engaging in that behavior, you know that you can expect a follow-up conversation ahead of time if you don't address what you're doing. So it's almost like generalizing it. You're not pinpointing anybody. You're not saying, hey, speeding is an issue, Bobby. And then obviously you don't want to do that. But if you generalize it and that person hears it, it's almost like a dog whistles, right? The people that need to hear it are gonna catch that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. So it looks like we have all the votes in on the poll. So just taking a look at those results really quick. It looks like maintenance reminders is coming in first at 63%. So we will definitely look into diving into that topic for you guys. Thank you so much to everybody that participated in that poll. Next question that we have for you here, Carlos, we actually have two. Where can we download the aggressive driving breakdown report for the dashboard?
If you have access to a customer success team, engage them. Your reseller may be able to assist you with this part, or also the marketplace. I know they have a few. There you go. It would look like this. And you may have, and just to think too, just a reminder, it might not be enabled into your dashboard, but if you go under administration reports, report views is where all of your reports are located. And if you look for the aggressive driving report and you do find it there, you can go into the settings itself, into dashboard, and make sure that that's turned on and who should see it. And at the very least, turn on and make sure that you're a visible a person on it, save it, and it'll come onto your dashboard.
I have a very quick search reflex, so we're on top of it, guys. We've got this taken care of. It looks like the only other question that we have, it's also related to a very specific report. Where can I find the fuel mismatch report that I saw on the reporting tab in my Geotab?
That one is usually enabled by us at Geotab, and usually comes down through your reseller when they request matching your fuel card integration. And when it's part of the process of the fuel card integration, when we enable that and set it up on the back end, our team will actually add that report so we can have the correct settings into it. So I would engage the reseller, and if you have your customer success team available, then I can also engage them.
Alrighty, awesome. Well, it looks like those are all the questions that we have from today's session. So that makes that a wrap for this week's Wildcard Wednesday. Again, thank you so much to Sue and Carlos for joining us today, sharing the presentation and answering these questions for us. If you guys have any other questions, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to your reseller, account manager, your customer success representative if you have one. With that being said, until next time, I'm Shay Green, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We'll see you guys next time. Same Geotab time, same Geotab channel. Thanks so much, everybody.